Hello, this is Teresa. I'm back with another tutorial for Rinea. I'm going to be sharing this fairy window card. This is not an idea that I came up with. You may have heard of Jennifer McGuire, and this is actually a clever design she came up with for a pop-up card that will fit inside a standard A2 sized envelope. Now, Rinea is doing a collaboration this month with Poppystamps, and I'm using a couple of their dies here, the Weeping Willow branches as well as the River Fairy die set. I'm going to be using these 2 sheets of cardstock, and they're cut to 5.5 by 6.25 inches. And I'm also going to be using this new color from Rinea foiled paper called Arctic Starstruck. So I'm taking the 2 pieces of cardstock that are cut to 5.5 by 6.25, and I'm going to be scoring both of them on each side at 1/2 inch and 1 inch. So I'm going to repeat the same steps on the second piece of cardstock that's cut to the same size. And I will go ahead and fold and use my bone folder to reinforce that fold on one of the sheets of paper. I'm not going to do that yet on the second one because I want to work on the background, and I'd like to keep that flat until I complete that part of the project. So this will be the back of the card, and the piece on the left will be on the front. So the next thing I'm going to do on the piece that will be on the front of the card is I temporarily straightened out where I had the folds in place, and I'm just marking basically the center point of this piece of cardstock because I'm going to use one of these 2 oval dies. I'm using 2 that are basically just one size from each other in the set. So I've already die cut out that oval, and I'm going to repeat the process on a separate piece of 4.25 by 5.5 inch cardstock. But before I do go ahead and die cut the second oval, I'm going to trim off a little bit of that piece because I'm going to use it to reinforce the inside of this card front. And in that way, by trimming off a little bit of the sides of that piece of cardstock, it will allow me to fold over the places where I added score lines earlier. So now I'm just being careful to line that up so it is centered in the panel. I'm going to take the larger die and temporarily put it in the place where I die cut it before, and then I'm adding the smaller die cut oval, taping that down and just moving the large oval die out of the way, and then run that through my die cut machine. So now I'm basically going to do the same thing again, except just using the larger die directly onto the Arctic Starstruck foiled paper, and then that way that will be the front that covers the white cardstock on the very front of the card. So this will be the piece that goes on the outside front, like so. So by the time I stack up all 3 of these layers, this is the order that they will be going in. So yes, I have the larger piece sandwiched in between the Arctic paper that goes on the front and this smaller piece of cardstock which goes on the inside. And because the oval window is cut out a little bit smaller than the one on the outside, I'll have this frame showing on the front. So now I'm going to use a bone folder, and I'm going to go ahead and refold these into a mountain fold, and I'm just reinforcing that fold, and when I pick it up you'll see what it looks like from the top view. And now I'm going to work on the background. I'm starting with Sapphire Gold Glossy Rinea foiled paper. I'm using this Dilutions white spray paint, and I'm just using the nozzle to flick on some white paint so that I can have kind of a starry looking background. And any kind of white paint, whether it's a spray or watered down acrylic paint, will work for this. And I put that aside to dry. So now I'm going to cut out the Weeping Willow branches, and I'm using the Emerald Gold Glossy foiled paper from Rinea. And I want to cut this out twice, but what I don't want is it going in the same direction as the first one because I only have one die. So in order to make this work, I have to flip the gold paper over, so I'm going to place the die onto the side that isn't cut, so I have just enough room to get that die in there. And I run it through the die cut machine, and what I'll end up with are two die cuts, but instead of being both from the same, on the same side, so to speak, I'll have one that will make almost like a curtain effect when I show the two of them together. So now I'm just kind of cutting away the excess foiled paper so that I'll have just the branches left. And I'm leaving a thick border across the top because I'm going to need that in order to glue these two pieces to my project. So now that I'm cutting away this piece, I'll just show you what I mean by having the two separate pieces in the opposite directions. So now I'm using a piece of ruby and gold glossy foiled paper from Rinea, and I'm going to be die cutting the river Fairie from the gold in red. I made the wings red and the body gold. So now you can see how I'm using that wider strip I left across the top of my die cut willow branches. I'm putting some glue onto that and folding it over the top of the background that I created earlier. So that's going to be glued down flush to the back of my card. So as you can see now, I'm doing what I did earlier with the front piece. I'm just folding where it has been scored, and then I glue this piece in place. And then I'll grab the front of it and place the Arctic foiled paper on top of it, glue that in place, and then I'll have the basics for the front created, and then I'll start putting all the different elements together. So now you can see how this is going to get glued together, and when you press it down it will fit inside an envelope, and when you pull it out it pops open, and then you can stand it up vertically. So now I'm stamping the sentiment onto a separate piece of white cardstock, and then I'm going to use some of the same sapphire paper to create not a background, but I'm going to have some of that peek out on each side of the white cardstock just to give it a little more interest. And then that is going to go across the front window as the sentiment as I'm showing here. So I will need to trim off a bit on each side to make it fit. And now that I've done that, I'm adding some liquid glue on either side, and then I'm going to place that on the back side of this card front. So since I've used liquid glue, it gives me a little bit of time to move it around until I have it in the perfect spot. So now that this is done, I'm going to put the entire thing together. And what I need for the fairy is a little, well, I'll show that to you in a minute, but before I get to that, I'm going to glue down the other weeping willow branches to the inside so that there's some dimension throughout the card. There's the branches in the background in the very back. There are this set of branches in the very front, and in the center of it all will be the fairy. And to show you how that comes together, I'll show you what I do with the fairy. I'm going to attach a small piece of acetate, and I'm using some score tape. It's 1/8 inch. And once I remove the backer from that score tape, I'm going to attach it directly to the back of my die cut fairy. And off screen, I glued the two wings onto the back of that die cut. So once I have placed that on the piece of acetate, then I can check to make sure that I have the placement where I want it, and I have my last chance basically to make adjustments. Once I'm happy with the placement, I'm going to hold the right hand side. I'm going to press the fairy down long enough to add some adhesive to just the outside of that fold. I don't want the glue on the inside, just that outside part that's going to be glued against the top piece of the card. So now that I have the fairy in place, I'm going to add some glue to one side, and what I'll do is glue that side, move things around until it's in place, and then use some reverse tweezers to hold that for a minute or two to allow the glue to set. And then I will go ahead and do the same thing on the opposite side to glue the whole thing together. And as an additional touch, I'm adding some sparkle by using some stickles that are kind of a turquoise color, and just using my finger to lightly tap some on. I don't want to cover the sentiment up, I just wanted to add a little bit of extra something to it. So that completes the card, and you can see as I press in the sides, the fairy moves around a bit. When I fold it flat, I'll be able to put it into a standard size envelope. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and here are some others to watch in the meantime. See you next time.